Welcome back everyone to this lecture on the case statement. We can use the case statement to only execute SQL code when certain conditions are met. This is very similar to if-else statements you can find in other programming languages such as C++, JavaScript, Python, etc. Now there are two main ways to use a case statement, and that is to use a general case statement or a case expression. Now keep in mind, in many situations, both methods can actually retrieve and lead to the same results. So I want to first show you the syntax for a general case statement. Here's the syntax for the general case. And the way it works is, at the very beginning, we have this little block of code that we're going to start off with the case keyword. And then we have when and then keywords. So we start off by saying case, and then when a certain condition is met, then have some sort of result returned. And then if we want to check against another condition, we can keep listing them. So when condition 2 occurs, then return result 2. And finally, at the end, we can have an else statement, which basically says if none of the above conditions are met, then return some final other result. And then we can end that. So let's go ahead and see an actual example of this so it's a little more clear. Let's imagine that we have a very, very simple table. And in fact, this table is just the table here I've seen on the bottom, where there's a column called A, and there's two entries in this table or column, entry 1 and entry 2. So this is our test table, and if I say select everything from the test table, this is what shows up. Now let me show you what it looks like if we want to use a general case statement. So I will say select the A column, comma, case, and then I can do the following. I can say case when A is equal to 1, then string 1. So what that is saying is if the instance in column A for that row happens to be equal to 1, then go ahead and return the string 1. And let's check for other cases or conditions. When A is equal to 2, then return the result string 2. Else, if it's not 1 or if it's not 2, return other. And then I say end, and then from whatever table I want. So the way this works is we're basically inserting this general case statement inside of this select call, almost as if it was another column. So notice here I'm saying select A, comma, and then I have this case statement inserted, which is basically going to return the results based off those conditions as another column. So the column is by default called case, but you can always use an alias to name it something else. So you could say something like case when A is equal to 1, then 1, when A is equal to 2, then 2, else other as label, and then that's going to relabel that returned column. So basically the way I like to think about this is for the general case, you're just essentially substituting calling a column that already exists with your own general case statement that is going to return certain results based off certain conditions within another column. And then you just end the case, letting SQL know that you're going to continue on with the rest of your query, such as doing something like from test. And if you want, you can add things like order by after that. So the way I like to think about this is the general case is kind of this giant substitute for a column call where you can define your own conditional logic as far as what you want returned. Now that was the general case statement. Let's explore the case expression syntax. And this is sometimes confusing to beginners because it looks very similar to the general case statement. The main difference is that the case expression syntax first evaluates an expression and then compares the result with each value in the when clauses sequentially. So this is the case expression syntax, and the difference is pretty subtle, but you'll see here that right in front of the case, we're actually going to evaluate an expression. And then the when statements, instead of having actual conditions within them, they're just going to have values. So they're basically checking for when this expression is equal to value 1, then return result 1. The case where this expression is equal to value 2, then return result 2. else return some other result, and then end that case expression. So let's go ahead and rewrite our previous example. So the way this works is, notice here, I no longer have to actually have that condition after the when. With the case expression syntax, I'm now saying case A, so that's my expression, just the column itself. When it's equal to 1, then 1. When it's equal to 2, then 2, else other. So this is basically saving you the step of having to check those conditions yourself manually. You can think of the case expression as something to use when you're just going to do a bunch of checks for something being equal or equality. The general case syntax that we saw earlier, let me go back to it here, we can see this is actually going to be more flexible because the case expression syntax essentially just checks for equal or equality to the provided expression, which can be as simple as a single column provided. The general case syntax allows us to do all kinds of conditional checks. So we can do things like when A is in between the values of 5 and 10, or when A is greater than 4, etc. So case for the general syntax allows us to do a bunch of conditions individually and uniquely right after those when calls. The case expression syntax is essentially just evaluating one expression, and then you're listing the possible values to be equal to that expression. And often that expression is just a simple column call, such as case A, when 1, then 1, when 2, then 2, and so on. Okay, so those are very simple examples, but let's go ahead and look at some more realistic examples through pgadmin. I'm going to open up pgadmin now. Okay, here I am inside pgadmin. I'm going to go ahead and just explore the customer table. So let's grab everything from customer, run that, and I see I have a customer ID, store ID, first name, and so on. Let's go ahead and work under the assumption that the customer IDs are assigned as serial primary keys. So what I mean by that is if your customer ID is 1, then you were the first customer to ever purchase something at our store or rent something from our DVD space. And if you're customer number 2, then you were the second customer, and so on. So let's go ahead and run a promotion for maybe our different tiers of customers. Let's go ahead and set customers that are in the first 100 to be kind of a premium status, and then customers between 100 and 200 to be a plus status, and then everyone else just to be a normal customer. So this is a great situation for the case. So I'm going to select customer ID from customer and run that. And so now we're essentially kind of simplifying this down so it matches more or less what we were doing in our calls earlier in the slides. Note here, it's actually not in order by exactly because 524 for some reason is just returned faster than everything else. So let's go ahead and make those categories with a case statement. So what I like to do is I set up my normal query here, and then I'm going to pretend this is another column call. So I will say comma, and then this is where I'm going to insert my case statement. And it's really quite common to use spacing and indentation to help organize your case statement. Although keep in mind that SQL itself doesn't really care about your spacing or indentation that much, as long as your keywords aren't touching each other essentially. Okay, so here's our case statement. So I'm going to say case, and then let's go ahead and write in our corresponding end. So now that we have that kind of done, I'm going to use the general syntax, which means I'm going to have my when calls. So here I'm going to say when, and let's go ahead and first check for when the customer IDs are less than or equal to 100. Going to put these inside parentheses. So when the customer ID is less than or equal to 100, then, and I have to decide what to return when the actual case happens to be that the customer ID is less than or equal to 100. So let's label these our premium customers, since we want to reward them for being within the first 100 customers. And now let's go ahead and have another condition to check against. Note here I don't put a comma between my conditions. So now I'm going to say when. Let's go ahead and type out when customer ID, and now let's do everyone that's between 100 and 200. So I will say between 100 and 200. Then let's call these customers plus. So note here, basically all I'm doing with this general case statement is after the when keyword, I have some sort of condition and I have a lot of flexibility over these sort of conditions. And then I have to decide what do I return if this condition happens to be true. And then you can keep listing when, then lines or clauses for as many conditions as you want to check. Then the last thing we're going to add in after you've decided you've checked all your when conditions is an else statement. And the else statement basically says, hey, if you're not true for any of these conditions, meaning I didn't return a premium and I didn't return a plus, then what should I return? So go ahead and check for those conditions. Else, if none of them happen to be true, go ahead and return something. So let's go ahead and say that will be the string normal. So let's go ahead and run this, make sure we have no typos. And I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so we can see this here. But note that I have my premium customers. We can expand this column. So all my premium customers, and if I keep scrolling down beyond 100, then I have my plus customers. And then if I scroll down beyond that, I should be able to see my normal customers over here beyond 200. Okay, so again, the syntax for a general case statement is you basically plug it in lieu of a column here, and then you have your when keyword, the condition you want to check, then what should you return when that condition happens to be true. It doesn't have to be a string, it could have been a number or a digit, etc. Okay, so last thing I want to point out is you often want to actually call this something. Note here it just returns the column name as case. After the end statement, I can use an alias saying something like as, and I could say like as customer class, so what class this customer's in. And I run that and I'll rename the column for me. Okay, so we can see here that the general case statement is the one that's the most flexible because you can check all kinds of conditions. But often for case statements, you're just going to be checking for equality. So the simpler version of that is that case expression, where right at the top, you're going to check for a case expression and then just check for equality off of that. So let's imagine that we are running a raffle. So let's go ahead and just come back to select customer ID from customer, run that, and whoops, make sure we delete that comma here, run that. So here's my customer ID, and I'm just selecting a customer ID from customer. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold a raffle. And let's say I held the raffle separately, just kind of some random lotto tickets, and I'm going to pick based off the customer ID number. So based off kind of my random choice, I decided number 2 is the winner, customer ID number 5 is second place, and everyone else is just normal. They didn't win anything. So how can I do this with a case expression? The case expression is probably the better choice here because I'm just going to check for equality. I'm just checking that if the customer ID is equal to 2, then I want them labeled as a winner. If the customer ID is labeled, let's say 5, that will be the second place in our raffle. Everyone else is going to be just labeled as normal. Since I'm just checking for equality here and not checking for things like between two values, then a customer expression is, or excuse me, a case expression is probably the best case for this customer ID check. So the way this works is same as before. I'll say case and then I will say end, except now right after my case, I'm going to provide my expression. And the expression here is just a simple column call, which is the customer ID. So I'm just going to check for the customer ID being equal to something. So note here again, my comma, and this case end block is essentially the substitute for another column call. So I'm saying case where the customer ID, and then I'm going to say when, and I no longer need to say something like customer ID equal to 2. I can just type in 2. So this is nice, and this is just going to check for equality against this expression. So let's say when the customer ID is 2, then that's the person that won the raffle. We'll say winner. And now I can have another case. So let's say when customer ID 5, let's go ahead and have that person be second place. And then finally, everyone else, we'll just list them as normal. And I'm going to call this right after end as raffle results. So again, note the difference here is that I have this expression, often just a single column call, and instead of checking for conditions within the when, I'm just checking for equality. So it's checking when customer ID, when it's 2. Customer ID, when it's 5. So obviously this one is not as flexible as the general case statement, but it's kind of faster to type out. Basically saves you from having to type out customer ID equal to this, customer ID equal to that. Instead, you just write customer ID one time, and then you just check for equality with the values themselves. Let's go ahead and run this, make sure we didn't commit any typos, and it looks like we're good. So let's expand on the results. And note here that it looks like customer number 2, the raffle results is this person is a winner, and customer ID number 5, this person got second place. Okay, awesome. Now the last thing I want to show you is you can actually begin to then perform operations on the results of these case statements. So let's take a look at our film table. I'm going to say select everything from film, run that. So we have our film ID, title, etc. And if we take a look at this, we have the actual rental rate. So we know there's different rental rates. Let's go ahead and make some categories for rental rates. And then let's also figure out how many we have per category. Keep in mind, technically, I could do this through some sort of group by call, but this is really to drive home the point that you can take these complicated case syntax statements and then perform operations such as a sum on them. I kind of want to walk through a little bit of logic here that may serve you well in the future, but keep in mind that you could have figured out this in other ways. So you don't need to write back saying, could we have done this with a group by? You probably could have if you were creative enough. So let me show you what I'm talking about first. So we're going to say select the rental rate from film, since that's kind of all I'm interested in. So I have these different rental rates, and I have a 99 cents rental rate. I want to figure out how many of these do I actually have. So let's go ahead and start categorizing things. We're going to say select, and I'm going to do the following. We're actually just going to say select case, and now we're going to check for the rental rates when it's 99 cents, then label it or return 1, else 0. And then we have to have that end call associated with the case. So note what I'm doing here. I'm basically just saying select case rental rate. If it's 99 cents, then return a 1 in this new column, else return a 0, end this. So when I run this, I have this nice little case here. So case integer, bunch of zeros, and notice here it happens to be 1 if that rental rate was then 99 cents. And to kind of drive this point further, I could actually ask for the original rental rate column, comma, run that, and I can see the direct results next to each other. So nothing too crazy right now. It's essentially the exact same thing we did before, except we're returning 0 if it's not 99 cents and a 1 if it is. So now what I can do is I can actually take the sum of this case column to figure out exactly how many 99 cents movies I have. So the way I would do that is just as if this was any other normal column, I'm going to take this whole thing and pass it into sum. And then I'm going to delete rental rate since it doesn't make sense to call rental rate anymore, since I'm just taking the sum of this. And then I'm going to say as, let's say, number of bargains. So I'm going to say 99-cent films are a bargain. So if I take the sum of this returned column in the case, then it's going to give me a 1 for every time there's a 99 cents, essentially counting how many 99-cent movies I have. So we run this, and we get back that the number of bargains I have, or number of 99-cent movies I have, are 341. So you're probably thinking right now, well, this isn't super useful because I could have already done this with things I know about group by and count and where and having and all these other tools that we've learned so far. But what if I want to now do this for different categories, such as bargains and regular prices? So I can keep doing this as if there were more columns. So after this, let's go ahead and just call this bargains. So these are my bargain movies. I'm also going to take the sum of, let's say, movies when they're $2.99. So let's say sum case rental rate when $2.99, then 1, else 0, and then finally end. So basically the exact same thing I did up here, except now I'm checking for $2.99. And let's go ahead and call these, let's say, as regular. So what's going to be pretty nice about this, and note here my comma, because I'm basically treating this whole sum as another column call, that when I run this, I now am able to format the results in this easy to read manner, where I have the number of bargains being showed at the exact same time of the number of $2.99 films. And so I can keep doing this for the other cases. Go ahead and copy this again, add in a comma. I'm just going to copy and paste here the exact same code, except now I'm going to check for when it's $4.99. And let's go ahead and call these our premium movies because they're more expensive. And now I'm going to run this. And now at the exact same time as separate columns, I can see bargains, regular, and premium. So this is something that is a lot more difficult to do given the other tools we know. And it's almost impossible to format it in this way where each of these counts has its own column and its own labeled column. So number of bargains, number of regular movies, and then number of so-called premium movies. So this is really nice, and it allows me again to call functions on the results of a case column. And it's super common to use case with a when statement, and then you say then 1, else 0, as ways of summing things up or counting the results. Okay, so that's it for this particular lecture on the case syntax. Coming up next, we're going to have a challenge for you to make sure you fully understood what we went over here. Thanks, and I'll see you at that challenge lecture.